The soft hum of rain against glass filled the expansive office as Matthew Sinclair sat motionless behind his desk. The sprawling view of Seattle's misty coastline was framed by floor-to-ceiling windows, but he hardly noticed the grey waves crashing against the distant shore. His focus was on the file before him, a neatly bound resume with a photo clipped to the top. The woman's smile was warm, genuine, an odd contrast to the cold rigidity of the house he ran. Evelyn Brooks, his assistant of 10 years, stood quietly to the side, her eyes flickering between Matthew and the files she had carefully prepared. "This is the last one for today," she said gently, placing a steaming cup of coffee on his desk. Emma Alvarez, pediatric nurse, 6 years of experience, specialized in chronic respiratory conditions. Her references are impeccable. Matthew exhaled, a soft sigh escaping his lips. "We've had impeccable before, Evelyn, and they never last." His voice was even, but it carried the weight of exhaustion. "They didn't last because you expect perfection," Evelyn replied, her tone measured yet firm. "Noah doesn't need perfection, Matthew. He needs stability." Matthew turned his chair to face her, his expression unreadable. "Stability doesn't come from hiring someone we can't trust. The cameras stay. It's non-negotiable." Evelyn's mouth tightened, but she nodded, knowing when to stop pushing. "She's waiting in the library. Shall I bring her in?" A faint nod was her only answer. Evelyn stepped out, leaving Matthew to gather his thoughts. His gaze fell to the photo of Emily, his late wife, perched delicately on the corner of his desk. Her warm smile seemed to challenge him even now, years after her untimely death. "I'm doing the best I can," he murmured to the empty room. The library was bathed in soft golden light as Emma Alvarez stood by the window, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She was calm, poised, and utterly unshaken by the grandeur of the Sinclair estate. When Matthew entered, she turned, offering a polite but confident smile. "Mr. Sinclair," she greeted. "Ms. Alvarez," he replied curtly, motioning for her to sit. For the next 15 minutes, they went through the usual formalities. Emma spoke clearly and confidently about her qualifications, her approach to caregiving, and her ability to manage challenging medical cases. Matthew listened, his sharp gaze never leaving her face. "And what's your philosophy when it comes to children with chronic conditions?" he asked finally, leaning back in his chair. "Children need more than medication and routine checkups, Mr. Sinclair," Emma replied without hesitation. "They need connection, creativity, and a sense of normalcy, however limited it may be." Matthew's lips pressed into a thin line. "Connection is a luxury we can't afford. My son's safety is paramount." Emma met his gaze evenly. "Safety doesn't mean isolation. Connection isn't a luxury, it's a necessity for healing. And respectfully, installing cameras everywhere sends a message of mistrust to both Noah and anyone caring for him." The room grew tense. Evelyn, standing discreetly by the door, stiffened as she watched Matthew's jaw tighten. "You have an impressive resume, Ms. Alvarez," Matthew said after a long pause. "But my household runs on structure and boundaries. Are you prepared for that?" "I'm prepared to do what's best for Noah," Emma replied firmly. For the first time, Matthew allowed himself a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You start tomorrow." The next morning, Emma arrived at the Sinclair estate precisely at 8 a.m. The mist clung to the air, curling around the sprawling garden like a soft blanket. Evelyn greeted her at the door, her usual calm demeanor tinged with curiosity. "Welcome back," Evelyn said, her sharp eyes scanning Emma's modest attire and practical bag. "Matthew is in his office. I'll show you to Noah's room." As they walked through the sleek, modern hallways, Emma took in the stark, minimalist design of the mansion. Everything was polished, pristine, and cold. It was a home built for efficiency, not warmth. Noah's room is just down here, Evelyn continued, stopping at a door decorated with glowing stars and a small sign that read, Noah's Universe. Her tone softened as she knocked lightly and entered without waiting for a reply. Inside, Emma found a small boy curled up on the bed, engrossed in a thick book about marine life. Noah was pale, with soft brown hair and wide eyes that mirrored his father's intensity. His thin frame spoke of his illness, but there was a spark in his expression as he glanced up at Emma. "Noah," Evelyn said gently, "this is Ms. Alvarez. She'll be helping take care of you from now on." Emma knelt beside the bed, her smile warm and genuine. "Hi, Noah. I hear you're a big fan of the ocean." Noah blinked at her, clutching the book tighter. "Do you like whales?" he asked cautiously. "I love them," Emma replied, her tone light but sincere. "Did you know humpback whales sing songs that can be heard miles away underwater?" Noah's face lit up, though he quickly tried to hide his excitement. "Yeah, I read that they change their songs every year." "They do. It's like they're composers, creating new music all the time," Emma said, her voice softening. "Maybe we can learn some whale songs together sometime." Noah gave her a small, tentative smile. Evelyn cleared her throat. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted. Lunch is at noon sharp, and Matthew prefers punctuality." As Evelyn left, Emma took a seat in the chair beside Noah's bed. "So, what's your favorite sea creature?" she asked, settling in for the conversation. Noah's face brightened as he began to talk about dolphins, jellyfish, and the mysteries of the deep ocean. Emma listened intently, chiming in with her own knowledge and encouraging his curiosity. When noon approached, Emma gently reminded Noah it was time to head to the dining room. His initial reluctance melted when she suggested they pretend they were sailors navigating their ship to a meal. By the time they arrived, Noah was giggling, a sound that echoed faintly through the mansion's halls. Matthew was already seated at the head of the sleek glass dining table, his gaze flicking between his laptop and the food before him. He looked up briefly as they entered, his expression neutral. "How was your morning?" he asked, addressing Noah but clearly observing Emma as well. Noah hesitated, glancing at Emma for reassurance. When she gave him a subtle nod, he said, "It was fun. Ms. Alvarez knows a lot about whales." Matthew raised an eyebrow. "Does she?" Emma met his gaze, unflinching. "It's important to meet children where they are. For Noah, that means diving into the world he loves, literally and figuratively." Matthew murmured, returning his attention to his laptop. Emma felt a flicker of frustration, but chose to let it pass. She turned her focus back to Noah, encouraging him to eat a little more of the soup he had been idly pushing around his bowl. Later that afternoon, as Noah napped and Emma reviewed his medical schedule in the kitchen, Evelyn entered with a pointed look. "You've made a good impression on Noah," Evelyn said, her voice low. "But Matthew, that's another story. He doesn't trust easily." Emma didn't look up. "Trust isn't built overnight, Ms. Brooks. But I'm here for Noah, and he's what matters." Evelyn studied her for a moment before giving a small nod. "We'll see." As the evening settled over the Sinclair mansion, Emma found herself in the kitchen preparing Noah's evening nebulizer treatment. The faint hum of the machine filled the room as Noah sat at the counter, his legs dangling from the stool. "Do you ever miss the ocean?" he asked suddenly, his voice soft. Emma smiled, glancing up from the timer she was setting. "Every day. It's one of the most peaceful places I know. What about you? Do you miss it?" Noah nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Dad says it's too risky. The air, the water. Everything's dangerous for me." Emma's heart ached at the resignation in his tone. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You're right to be careful, but sometimes we have to take little steps to feel alive. Maybe one day we'll find a way to visit safely." Noah's eyes brightened at the suggestion, but the moment was interrupted by Matthew's arrival. He stood in the doorway, his posture rigid as his gaze swept over the scene. "Is everything ready for his treatment?" Matthew's tone was clipped, more a statement than a question. "Yes, Mr. Sinclair," Emma replied evenly, maintaining her calm. "Good." He walked into the room, checking the nebulizer settings himself, though they were already perfect. His need for control was palpable, a weight pressing down on every interaction. As Noah breathed through the mask, his small body relaxing, Matthew lingered, his gaze lingering on his son before flicking toward Emma. "I trust everything went smoothly today?" "It did," Emma replied, her voice measured. "Noah's incredibly bright. We talked about whales, and he ate a decent lunch. He even laughed." Matthew's brow furrowed slightly. "Laughed?" "Yes," Emma said, her tone softening. "He's curious, imaginative. He just needs more moments like that." Matthew didn't respond immediately, his expression unreadable. Finally he said, "We'll see how things go." Then, with a terse nod, he left the room. Later that night, after Noah was tucked into bed and the house had grown quiet, Emma found herself walking the halls. The Sinclair mansion, for all its grandeur, felt hollow, like an echo of something once vibrant, but now subdued. She paused in front of the closed door, marked with a small, almost imperceptible plaque. "Emily's Study." The sight of it sent a shiver down her spine. She had heard of Emily Sinclair. Her tragic death was a whisper in the Seattle elite. This door, locked and untouched, seemed like a relic of unresolved grief. The sound of footsteps made her turn. Evelyn approached, her expression unreadable. "That's a room you won't be seeing inside," she said quietly. "I understand," Emma replied, stepping back. "Do you?" Evelyn asked, crossing her arms. "You seem like someone who wants to fix things, Ms. Alvarez. But some things aren't meant to be fixed." Emma met her gaze steadily. "I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here to help Noah. If that helps Mr. Sinclair in the process, so be it." Evelyn studied her for a long moment, before nodding slightly. "Good night, Ms. Alvarez." As Evelyn disappeared into the shadows, Emma lingered for a moment longer, her thoughts swirling. The cracks in Matthew Sinclair's carefully constructed walls were small but visible. Noah was her priority, but she couldn't ignore the weight of the grief and fear that filled this house. The next day would mark a new beginning, not just for Noah, but for Emma as well. As she prepared herself for the challenges ahead, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Sinclair family had more buried secrets and more potential for healing than she had anticipated. Emma's first full day at the Sinclair mansion began with a steady drizzle outside, the Seattle morning shrouded in grey. She entered the kitchen early, finding Evelyn already at work organizing the day's meals. The air was filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the faint hum of rain on the windows. "You're early," Evelyn remarked, glancing over her shoulder. "I like to start the day prepared," Emma replied, pulling out Noah's medical schedule from her bag. "I want to review his routine before he wakes up." Evelyn handed her a steaming cup of coffee. "That boy's schedule is as meticulous as Matthew himself. Breakfast is at 8 sharp, nebulizer at 9. But don't expect much conversation at the table if Matthew joins." Emma nodded, grateful for the insight. She was about to ask more about Noah's day-to-day habits when a soft voice broke through the quiet. "Good morning." Emma turned to see Noah standing at the doorway, his tousled hair and sleepy eyes making him look even younger than his 8 years. "Morning, sailor," Emma greeted warmly, crouching to his level. "Did you sleep well?" Noah shrugged, rubbing his eyes. I had a dream about whales. That sounds like a great start to the day, Emma said, smiling. How about we fuel up with some breakfast so you can tell me all about it? As Noah climbed onto a stool at the kitchen counter, Evelyn placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of him. He hesitated, picking at the food with little interest. Emma watched quietly for a moment before speaking. You know, sailors need their energy, especially if they're going to explore the ocean. Noah looked up at her, his expression curious. Why? Because you never know what you'll find out there, Emma said conspiratorially, leaning closer. Maybe a giant squid or a hidden treasure, but only if you're strong enough to handle the adventure. Noah giggled softly, taking a small bite of toast. Evelyn raised an eyebrow but said nothing, busying herself with tidying the counter. As the morning progressed, Emma followed Noah's strict medical routine. The nebulizer treatment went smoothly, and she encouraged him to talk about his favorite ocean creatures as a distraction. But it was clear to her that the boy's world was small, confined to the mansion's walls and the limits of his father's rigid protection. By mid-morning, Emma decided to test the boundaries. She found Matthew in his office, typing furiously on his laptop. The room was as meticulously arranged as the rest of the house, with no sign of personal clutter save for the framed photo of Emily on the desk. "Mr. Sinclair," Emma began, her tone polite but firm. Matthew didn't look up. "Yes?" "I'd like to take Noah outside for a short walk, just around the garden," she said quickly, anticipating his resistance. Matthew stopped typing and fixed her with a sharp gaze. "He doesn't go outside." "Why not?" Emma pressed, holding his stare. "It's not safe. The air, the allergens. There's too much risk," Matthew replied, his voice clipped. "With respect, Mr. Sinclair," Emma said, her tone unwavering, "keeping him indoors all the time isn't protecting him, it's isolating him. Even 10 minutes in the garden could do wonders for his mood and energy." Matthew leaned back in his chair, his expression hard. "And if something happens?" "I'm trained to handle emergencies," Emma assured him, "and I'll have his inhaler with me at all times." For a long moment, Matthew said nothing, his jaw tightening as he considered her request. Finally, he exhaled sharply. 10 minutes, that's it." "Thank you," Emma said, her voice calm despite the small victory. As she left the office, Emma couldn't help but feel the weight of his mistrust. But she also knew that small steps like this were the key to helping Noah, and perhaps even Matthew, break free from their self-imposed walls. Emma wasted no time preparing Noah for their brief trip outside. She bundled him in a lightweight jacket, slipped his inhaler into her pocket, and led him to the mansion's sprawling garden. The drizzle had eased into a fine mist, and the fresh scent of rain-soaked earth filled the air. The garden was a masterpiece of symmetry, with manicured hedges, vibrant flower beds, and a small stone pathway winding toward a central fountain. Yet, for all its beauty, it lacked the liveliness of a place meant for children. Noah hesitated at the threshold of the glass doors, his small hand gripping Emma's tightly. "Are you sure it's okay?" he asked, glancing nervously behind him as if expecting his father to appear and stop them. Emma crouched to meet his eye level. "It's more than okay, Noah. Your dad said we could stay out for 10 minutes and I'll be right here with you the whole time. Nothing bad will happen, I promise." After a moment's hesitation, Noah nodded and stepped outside. His sneakers crunched softly against the gravel as he took a cautious step, then another. The mist clung to his hair, and he tilted his head back to take in the vast grey sky above. "It smells different," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's the smell of the world waking up after the rain," Emma replied, her tone light. "What do you think?" Noah shrugged, but wandered further along the path, his steps becoming steadier. He stopped near the fountain, staring at the water rippling under the light drizzle. "It's pretty." "It is," Emma agreed, her hands resting on her knees as she crouched beside him. "You know, fountains are like little oceans for the creatures who live in them. Fish, frogs, maybe even turtles if we're lucky." Noah giggled, his small fingers reaching out to touch the cool stone edge. For the first time, Emma saw a glimmer of joy in his eyes. Something freer, untethered from the constraints of his daily routines. As he leaned closer to peer into the water, a rustling sound caught Emma's attention. She turned to see Matthew standing at the garden's edge, his tall frame stiff and unmoving. His arms were crossed, and his piercing gaze was locked on them. Emma straightened, her heart sinking. Had she overstepped? She motioned subtly for Noah to stay by the fountain and approached Matthew, her footsteps measured. "I said 10 minutes, Matthew said evenly, his voice low but edged with warning. "It's been 6, Emma replied calmly. "And as you can see, he's doing fine." Matthew's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to make that call." Emma resisted the urge to sigh. "Mr. Sinclair, I understand your concerns, but Noah needs moments like this. Look at him." Matthew's gaze shifted toward his son, who was now crouched by the fountain, giggling as he gently splashed the water. The sight made something flicker in his expression, an almost imperceptible softening. "He's happy," Emma said, her voice softer now. "And isn't that worth the risk?" Matthew didn't respond immediately. His jaw clenched, and for a moment Emma thought he might order them back inside. But then he let out a sharp exhale and said, 4 more minutes. Emma nodded, grateful for the concession, and returned to Noah's side. The boy looked up at her, his face glowing with excitement. "Dad's watching," Noah whispered. "He is," Emma said, smiling, "but only because he cares about you." The remaining minutes passed quickly, and when they returned inside, Noah's cheeks were flushed with color, his steps lighter. Evelyn greeted them in the entryway, her sharp gaze flicking from Noah's smile to Matthew's brooding presence. "Well," she remarked, "looks like someone had a good time." Noah beamed up at her. "We saw a fountain, and Emma said it's like a tiny ocean." Evelyn smirked, but her eyes softened. "Tiny oceans, huh? Sounds like an adventure." As Emma helped Noah remove his jacket and settle back into his routine, she felt Matthew's presence linger. He said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes of hesitation, of conflict, and perhaps of the smallest seed of trust beginning to take root. That evening, as Noah slept peacefully, Emma reviewed the day's events in her small room on the 2nd floor. The Sinclair mansion, though vast, felt strangely intimate in the quiet hours of the night. The sound of distant waves crashing against the cliffs below drifted through her open window, mingling with her thoughts. The day had been a small victory, but she knew better than to rest easy. Matthew Sinclair was a man defined by his control, a fortress of discipline and precision built around his grief. Emma had glimpsed cracks in that fortress today, but it was clear he wasn't ready to let the walls come down completely. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at her door. Surprised, Emma opened it to find Evelyn standing there, holding a tray with 2 steaming mugs. "Thought you might need this," Evelyn said, handing her one of the mugs. "Chamomile tea. Helps with the aftermath of your first day." Emma chuckled softly, stepping aside to let Evelyn in. "Is it that obvious?" Evelyn took a seat on the small armchair by the window, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "Let's just say you handled Matthew better than most, but don't let his silence fool you. He's watching you, always." "I noticed," Emma replied, sipping her tea. "It's like he's waiting for me to slip up." "It's not just you," Evelyn said with a sigh. "It's everyone. After Emily, well, let's just say Matthew has a hard time trusting anyone. And Noah? He's the only thing keeping Matthew tethered to this world. Emma sat across from her, curious but cautious. What was she like? Emily, I mean. Evelyn hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of her mug. Emily was everything this house isn't now. Warm, bright. She could walk into a room and make you feel like you belonged there. Losing her broke Matthew in ways I don't think even he fully understands. Emma nodded, absorbing the weight of Evelyn's words. It explained so much, the rigid routines, the cameras, the suffocating sense of control. But it also made her wonder, was Matthew protecting Noah or himself? Before Emma could ask more, a faint cough echoed from the hallway. Both women froze, their gazes snapping toward the door. "Noah!" Emma said, already on her feet. She rushed to his room, finding the boy sitting up in bed, clutching his inhaler but struggling to catch his breath. "It's okay, Noah," Emma said calmly, sitting beside him and guiding his small hands. "Breathe with me, in and out, nice and slow." Matthew appeared moments later, his face pale, tension radiating from every step as he crossed the room. "What happened?" "A coughing fit," Emma replied without looking at him, her focus entirely on Noah. "He's fine, but we need to let him settle. Can you get some water?" For a moment, Matthew didn't move. It was as if he were rooted to the spot, torn between his instinct to take control and the realization that Emma knew what she was doing. Finally, he nodded and left the room. By the time he returned, Noah's breathing had steadied, and the boy was leaning back against the pillows, his eyes drooping with exhaustion. "Good job, sailor," Emma whispered, tucking the blanket around him. "You're all set now." Matthew handed her the water, his hands trembling slightly. Is this normal?" "It happens," Emma said gently, her voice softening. "But it's manageable, especially if we stay on top of his routine." Matthew's eyes lingered on Noah for a long moment before he finally spoke. "Thank you." Emma nodded, stepping back to give father and son space. As she left the room, she glanced back to see Matthew sitting on the edge of Noah's bed, his hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder. In that quiet moment, she saw not the controlled, aloof man she had met just days ago, but a father consumed by fear and love in equal measure. Back in her room, Emma let out a long breath. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but today had been a start. And sometimes, even the smallest steps could lead to the biggest changes. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of Noah's room, casting soft golden beams across the walls, decorated with glowing stars. Emma was already there, tidying up after Noah's nebulizer session while he flipped through a book on ocean creatures. His cheeks were still slightly pale from the previous night, but his eyes were brighter, full of the curiosity she was beginning to treasure. "Do you think whales sleep?" Noah asked suddenly, peering over the edge of his book. "They do," Emma said, sitting beside him on the bed. "But not the way we do. Whales have to come up for air, so only half their brain sleeps at a time. It's like they're always keeping watch." "Like Dad," Noah murmured, his voice quiet. Emma froze for a moment, taken aback by the simple but profound observation. "Your dad does watch over you," she said softly. "He loves you very much." Noah's lips pressed into a small line as he nodded. "But sometimes I think he's too scared, like he's waiting for something bad to happen." The words lingered in the air, heavy and unspoken. Emma wanted to reassure him, to say something that would erase the shadow of fear Noah clearly carried, but before she could, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Matthew appeared in the doorway, his sharp gaze flicking between Emma and Noah. "How's he doing this morning?" "Better," Emma replied, keeping her tone neutral. "We've had a good start." Matthew stepped inside, his presence commanding despite the casual grey sweater and dark jeans he wore. He glanced at the book in Noah's hands. More whales? Noah nodded, his expression lighting up. Emma told me they only half sleep, so they can watch for danger. Isn't that cool? Fascinating, Matthew said, his voice even, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Emma stood, sensing his discomfort. If it's all right, I'd like to plan some creative activities for Noah today. Something engaging, but low energy. What kind of activities? Matthew asked, his tone guarded. A little stargazing, Emma said, glancing at Noah. We could create a mini ocean of stars right here in his room. It's calming and educational. Matthew hesitated, his jaw tightening as he weighed her suggestion. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Fine, but keep it under an hour. Emma smiled at Noah, who was already grinning with excitement. Deal. As Matthew left, Emma exhaled quietly, knowing each small victory brought them closer to something more profound. That afternoon, Emma set up the stargazing session in Noah's room. She dimmed the lights, arranged a projector on the dresser, and positioned Noah's bed to give him the perfect view of the stars she planned to cast on the ceiling. Noah watched with growing excitement as she carefully adjusted the settings, transforming the room into a miniature planetarium. Swirling constellations and soft blue hues created a mesmerizing effect, turning the ceiling into a canvas of wonder. Wow, Noah breathed, his face alight with awe. It's like we're underwater, looking up at the stars. Exactly, Emma said, settling into a chair beside him. Sailors used the stars to navigate the ocean. They would follow constellations like the North Star to find their way home. Do whales follow stars too? Noah asked, his voice soft with curiosity. Not exactly, Emma said, smiling. But they follow sound, songs that guide them through the ocean, just like stars guide sailors. Noah tilted his head thoughtfully, his small hands gripping the edge of his blanket. Maybe we're like whales, he said after a moment, finding our way through the dark. Emma's heart tightened at the quiet poignancy of his words. Before she could respond, the door creaked open, and Matthew stepped inside. He paused in the doorway, his tall figure silhouetted against the hallway light, as his eyes adjusted to the dim glow of the room. "What's this?" he asked, his voice low but not unkind. "A starry ocean," Noah said eagerly, gesturing toward the ceiling. "Emma made it." Matthew's gaze flickered between the projected constellations and his son's delighted expression. His shoulders seemed to relax, though his face remained unreadable. "It's impressive," he admitted. "Would you like to join us?" Emma asked, her tone light but genuine. Matthew hesitated, the question clearly catching him off guard. For a moment it seemed as though he might refuse, but then he moved closer, pulling up a chair. Noah beamed at his father's presence, leaning slightly against him as they all gazed upward. "This one's Orion," Emma said, pointing at a cluster of stars. "Sailors used it to find their way south." "And this one?" Noah asked, pointing to another group. "That's Cassiopeia," Emma replied. "It's shaped like a big W." As the minutes passed, the room filled with quiet wonder. Matthew found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. The sight of Noah smiling, his voice brimming with curiosity, stirred something deep within him. When the session ended, Noah's eyelids were heavy, his energy waning. Matthew carried him to bed and tucked him in with uncharacteristic gentleness. "Thank you, Dad," Noah murmured, his voice drowsy. Matthew froze for a moment, then leaned down and pressed a kiss to his son's forehead. "Good night, champ." Emma watched from the doorway, a soft smile playing on her lips. As Matthew stepped out into the hall, his gaze briefly met hers. "You're good with him," he said quietly, his voice almost begrudging. "Because he's a great kid," Emma replied simply. Matthew nodded once, his expression unreadable, before turning and walking away. Emma lingered for a moment longer, her heart lightened by the small yet meaningful progress. Later that evening, as the house settled into its usual stillness, Emma found herself in the living room, tidying up the remnants of Noah's art supplies from earlier in the day. The crayons and papers bore his scribbled attempts at recreating the constellations they had seen together. She smiled at one particular drawing labeled Noah's Ocean Stars, where he had combined his love for marine life with the shapes of the constellations. "You've been busy," came Matthew's voice from behind her. Emma turned to find him standing by the doorway, his hands in his pockets. The soft glow of the table lamp cast his face in half shadow, but his usual guarded expression seemed less severe. "Noah has a vivid imagination," Emma said, holding up the drawing. "He sees the world in ways most people don't." Matthew stepped closer, his eyes scanning the paper. "He gets that from his mother." Emily always found wonder in the smallest things. Emma lowered the paper, catching the distant tone in his voice. It was the first time he had mentioned Emily directly. "She must have been remarkable," Emma said softly, her tone inviting but not prying. Matthew's jaw tightened and he hesitated before answering. "She was. She saw life as an adventure, no matter how hard it got. Losing her—" He trailed off, exhaling deeply. "It left a hole I haven't been able to fill." Emma nodded, sensing his vulnerability. "Grief doesn't go away," she said gently, "but it changes. Sometimes it makes room for something new, something different, but just as meaningful." Matthew studied her for a moment, as though weighing the truth of her words. "Noah seems happier," he admitted, his voice low. "You've brought something to this house I didn't think we'd ever have again." Emma smiled faintly. "Noah is the one bringing it back. He just needed someone to listen." Matthew's eyes flickered with something unspoken, but before he could respond, Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her expression hesitant. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her gaze darting between them. "Matthew, there's a call for you. It's Daniel. He says it's urgent." Matthew's posture stiffened, his moment of openness retreating. "I'll take it in my office," he said curtly, nodding once to Emma before leaving. As Evelyn lingered, her sharp gaze fixed on Emma, the tension in the room shifted. "You're making an impact," she said quietly, her voice almost cautious. "But don't let it go to your head. Matthew's not the type to trust easily." "I'm not here for him," Emma replied, her tone steady. "I'm here for Noah." Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded before retreating into the hallway. Emma glanced back at the drawings, her heart heavy with the complexities of the Sinclair household. Progress was slow, fragile, but undeniable, and while she didn't know what Matthew's call with Daniel entailed, she could sense the undercurrents of something larger brewing, something that could either bring them closer or pull them apart. As she turned off the lights and headed upstairs, Emma resolved to stay the course. For Noah, for the light she saw returning to his eyes, and perhaps for the possibilities she hadn't dared to imagine for herself. The morning began with a tense atmosphere lingering in the Sinclair mansion. Emma noticed it immediately when she walked into the kitchen and found Evelyn and Matthew speaking in hushed tones. Matthew's brows were furrowed, his tone sharp, though she couldn't make out the words. Evelyn caught sight of Emma first, quickly stepping away to busy herself with the coffee maker. "Good morning," Emma said carefully, glancing at Matthew, who barely acknowledged her as he sifted through a stack of papers on the counter. "Morning," he muttered distractedly, clearly preoccupied. Emma decided not to pry, turning her attention to preparing Noah's breakfast. The boy appeared moments later, shuffling into the kitchen in his pajamas, still groggy from sleep. His sleepy smile was enough to brighten the room, though the tension emanating from Matthew remained a heavy presence. "Good morning, sailor." Emma greeted cheerfully, placing a plate of pancakes in front of him. "Morning?" Noah replied, his voice still soft with drowsiness. He perked up as she added a swirl of syrup to the stack. "Thanks, Emma." As Noah began eating, Matthew finally straightened, setting the papers down with a sharp sigh. "I'll be in my office," he announced, his tone clipped. "Is everything all right?" Emma asked, unable to hide her concern. "Fine," Matthew replied, already heading toward the door. He stopped briefly, his gaze softening as it landed on Noah. "I'll check on you later, champ." As he disappeared down the hall, Emma exchanged a glance with Evelyn, who gave a slight shake of her head, silently advising her not to press further. The rest of the morning passed in quiet normalcy, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing just below the surface. Whatever it was, she had a sense it would soon reach them all. Later that morning, Emma took Noah to the playroom, hoping to keep his spirits high. The room was filled with an assortment of puzzles, books, and a modest collection of toys, though it all felt a bit too pristine, as if they hadn't been touched in weeks. "Want to try building a whale puzzle?" Emma asked, pulling a colourful box off the shelf. Noah hesitated but nodded, settling onto the carpet as Emma poured the pieces out between them. They worked together quietly at first, with Emma nudging him gently whenever he seemed unsure about a piece. Slowly, his enthusiasm began to build. "This one goes here," Noah said triumphantly, slotting a piece into place. "Exactly," Emma replied, smiling. "You're a natural at this." Noah grinned but quickly turned serious. "Do you think Dad will play with us later?" Emma paused, her hands stilling over the puzzle. "Maybe," she said carefully. "He's busy today, but I'm sure he'll want to see what we've built." Noah didn't look convinced. "He's always busy. Even when he's here, he's not really here." Emma's heart ached at the boy's quiet admission. Before she could respond, the sound of raised voices drifted down the hall. She glanced toward the door, her brow furrowing. "Wait here," she said gently to Noah, standing up and heading toward the commotion. She found the source of the noise near Matthew's office. The door was ajar, and inside, Matthew was pacing, his phone pressed tightly to his ear. His tone was clipped, angry. "Daniel, I don't care what they're offering," Matthew snapped. "That merger is not happening without my approval. End of discussion." Emma lingered by the doorway, debating whether to interrupt. Before she could decide, Matthew turned sharply and noticed her standing there. "Emma," he said, his tone cooling but still tense. "What do you need?" She hesitated, quickly composing herself. "I heard raised voices. I wanted to make sure everything was all right." Matthew rubbed the back of his neck, clearly trying to tamp down his frustration. "It's fine, just business. Nothing for you to worry about." "Understood," Emma replied, though the tension in his voice suggested otherwise. As she turned to leave, Matthew called after her, his tone softening. "How's Noah?" "He's doing well," she said, turning back to face him. "We're building a puzzle in the playroom. He was wondering if you might join us later." Matthew hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I'll see what I can do," he said, though it sounded more like a deflection than a promise. Emma nodded, retreating back to the playroom with a heavy heart. Noah looked up at her expectantly when she returned, but she didn't have the heart to tell him his father might not come. Instead, she sat down beside him and picked up a puzzle piece. "Let's finish this masterpiece. Your dad will be impressed when he sees it." Noah smiled faintly, but the shadow of disappointment lingered in his eyes. The quiet of the morning was broken later by the sound of Noah giggling in the living room. Emma followed the sound, finding him sitting cross-legged on the floor with a box of old toys in front of him. His face was lit with joy as he pulled out a wooden sailboat, its paint chipped but still vibrant. "Look what I found!" Noah exclaimed, holding it up for Emma to see. It's my dad's. Evelyn said he made it when he was a kid. Emma knelt beside him, marveling at the boat. That's amazing, Noah. Did your dad tell you about it? Noah shook his head. He doesn't talk about stuff like this much. Evelyn said he used to love making things like this with Grandpa. A pang of sadness tugged at Emma's heart. It was another glimpse into Matthew's tightly guarded past, a past that seemed so disconnected from the man he was now. Do you think he'll let me play with it? Noah asked, his voice filled with both hope and hesitation. I think he would, Emma said gently, but maybe you can ask him later when he's not busy. Noah nodded, carefully setting the boat aside before diving back into the box. As he rummaged through the toys, Emma noticed Evelyn watching them from the doorway, her arms crossed. He hasn't touched that box in years, Evelyn said quietly, stepping into the room. It used to be in the attic. I brought it down a few days ago, hoping it might spark something. Sparking something for Noah or Matthew? Emma asked, her tone light but curious. Both, Evelyn admitted, glancing at Noah. This house used to be full of life. Emily made sure of that. After she died, well, you can see what it's become. Emma nodded, understanding the unspoken weight in Evelyn's words. This house was a place of grief, but also of potential, a place that, with time, could heal. Do you think Matthew would ever join us in moments like this? Emma asked cautiously. Evelyn hesitated, then sighed. I think part of him wants to, but he doesn't know how. Emma looked back at Noah, who was now happily stacking blocks into the shape of a lighthouse. Maybe Noah can show him the way, she said softly. Evelyn gave her a small, knowing smile before turning to leave. As Emma watched Noah, an idea began to take shape, a way to bridge the distance between father and son, even if only a little. That evening, as the rain returned to its steady rhythm against the windows, Emma found herself preparing for the plan that had formed in her mind. She had noticed how much joy Noah had found in the old sailboat, and how curious he was about the father he rarely got to see outside of their structured routines. It was time to give both of them a chance to connect, on their own terms. After dinner, Emma approached Matthew in his office. He was at his desk, immersed in yet another phone call. The room was dim except for the glow of his computer screen, casting long shadows across his face. She waited patiently until he hung up, the tension in his shoulders evident as he leaned back in his chair. What is it? He asked, his voice edged with fatigue. I was hoping you could spare a little time for Noah tonight, Emma said directly. Matthew raised an eyebrow. He's already asleep, isn't he? Not yet, Emma replied with a small smile. He's waiting for you in the living room. There's something he wants to show you. Matthew hesitated, clearly torn between curiosity and his default response of declining. After a long moment he sighed and stood, following Emma down the hall. When they entered the living room, Noah was seated on the rug, the wooden sailboat cradled carefully in his lap. His face lit up at the sight of his father. "Dad, look at this!" Noah exclaimed, holding up the boat. "Evelyn said you made it when you were a kid." Matthew froze, his expression softening as his eyes fell on the sailboat. He crouched down, reaching out to run a finger over the chipped paint. "I did," he said quietly. "Your grandpa and I built it together. We used to take it to the pond near his house to see if it would float." "Can we do that?" Noah asked eagerly. Matthew blinked, caught off guard by the question. "The pond's far away, champ." "We have the fountain outside," Noah suggested, his smile widening. For a moment, Matthew said nothing, his gaze shifting from the boat to Noah's hopeful face. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right, let's see if it still floats." Emma watched from the doorway as father and son made their way outside, Noah practically skipping with excitement. She stayed behind, giving them the space to share this moment on their own. From her spot in the hallway, Emma could see them through the window. Noah knelt by the fountain, carefully setting the sailboat in the water, while Matthew knelt beside him, guiding his small hands. Their laughter echoed faintly through the rain, a sound that warmed the otherwise cold house. Emma smiled to herself, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. Tonight, the Sinclair mansion felt a little less hollow, a little more alive. The following morning brought a rare burst of sunshine breaking through Seattle's usual overcast sky. Emma felt the brightness reflected in the atmosphere of the Sinclair household. Noah was animated during breakfast, recounting the previous night's sailboat adventure to Evelyn, who listened with a mix of amusement and genuine joy. "Dad said we could try it again this weekend," Noah exclaimed, his face glowing. Evelyn shot a raised eyebrow at Emma, who smiled knowingly. "Sounds like a plan," she said, ruffling Noah's hair. Matthew entered the kitchen moments later, his phone in hand and his expression unusually calm. He gave Noah a brief nod before pouring himself a cup of coffee. "You were up late," Evelyn remarked, a teasing edge to her tone. Matthew glanced at her but didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Emma. "Thanks for suggesting last night," he said quietly, the sincerity in his voice catching her slightly off guard. "I think it meant a lot to him," Emma replied, keeping her tone neutral but warm. "It did," Matthew admitted, though he quickly shifted his focus to his phone. "But today's going to be a busy one. Daniel's been calling non-stop. There's an issue with the merger that needs my attention." Emma nodded, understanding his subtle warning. Whatever progress they'd made the night before might take a back seat to the demands of his business. The shift in Matthew's mood became more evident as the morning wore on. He spent hours in his office, his voice raised during several tense phone calls. Even Noah seemed to sense the change, his earlier excitement dimming as he played quietly in his room. By midday, Emma found herself pacing near the study, debating whether to intervene. She finally knocked lightly on the door and stepped inside after hearing a brusque, "Come in." Matthew looked up from his desk, his tie loosened and his usually composed demeanor frayed. "What is it?" "I wanted to check on you," Emma said, her voice calm but firm. "Noah's been asking about you all morning. He's worried." Matthew's expression flickered, guilt momentarily breaking through his frustration. "I can't deal with this right now," he said, his tone sharper than intended. "You're not just dealing with business, Matthew," Emma replied, taking a step closer. "You're dealing with your family. Noah needs you to be present. Not perfect, just present." Matthew's shoulders slumped slightly, and he ran a hand through his hair. "I'll try," he said after a long pause. Emma nodded, sensing his inner conflict. She knew the walls he'd built around himself wouldn't come down easily, but cracks were beginning to form. That afternoon, Emma decided Noah needed a distraction from the tension that had crept back into the house. She suggested they work on a new art project together, one that could connect to the adventure they'd shared the night before. "How about we make a map?" Emma asked as they spread out supplies on the dining table. "A map of what?" Noah asked, his curiosity sparking to life again. "A treasure map," Emma said with a conspiratorial smile. "Every great sailor needs one." Noah's face lit up, and he dove into the idea with enthusiasm, sketching islands, waves, and even a sea monster to guard the treasure. As they worked, Emma encouraged him to describe the places he drew, subtly drawing him into a world of imagination and storytelling. "This is where the whales live," Noah said, pointing to a cluster of blue shapes. "And here's the pirate cave where the treasure is." "And who's going to find the treasure?" Emma asked, adding a golden X at the center of the map. "Me and Dad?" Noah said without hesitation, his voice filled with determination. Emma paused, touched by the simplicity and hope in his words. "That sounds like an incredible adventure," she said softly. Just as they were finishing the map, Matthew walked into the room, his expression tired but curious as his eyes fell on the colorful creation. "What's this?" he asked, stepping closer. "A treasure map," Noah exclaimed, holding it up proudly. "We're going to find the treasure together." Matthew hesitated, his gaze shifting from the map to Emma. She gave him a small, encouraging smile, silently urging him to engage. "Looks like you've got quite the adventure planned," Matthew said, his tone softer than it had been earlier. "You'll come, right?" Noah asked, his eyes wide with hope. Matthew's shoulders relaxed slightly as he crouched beside his son. "Of course I'll come. We'll find that treasure together." Noah cheered, throwing his arms around his father, and for a moment the tension that had gripped the household seemed to dissolve. Emma watched the scene with quiet satisfaction, knowing this was another small but significant step forward. Yet as she glanced at Matthew's phone buzzing insistently on the counter, she couldn't help but feel that the outside world was closing in again, threatening to undo their fragile progress. The next day began uneventfully, but by mid-morning the calm was shattered by the sound of Matthew's raised voice coming from his office. Emma was in the living room with Noah, helping him assemble a small puzzle of marine life when the sound carried through the halls. "Is Dad mad again?" Noah asked, his voice tinged with worry. Emma glanced toward the closed office door, her smile carefully reassuring. "He's just working on something important, Noah. Sometimes work can be stressful." Noah nodded. Though his fingers fumbled with the puzzle pieces, his earlier enthusiasm dimmed. Emma's heart ached at the sight. She knew Matthew didn't intend for his frustrations to spill into the rest of the house, but they did. A few minutes later, Evelyn appeared, her usually calm demeanor replaced with a trace of unease. "Emma," she said quietly, gesturing toward the hallway. Emma excused herself, following Evelyn toward the kitchen where they could speak out of earshot. "It's the merger," Evelyn explained in hushed tones. "Something's gone wrong. Daniel called this morning with news about a potential leak. They think it might be sabotage." Emma frowned, the implications sinking in quickly. "Sabotage? That sounds serious." "It is," Evelyn said, her tone heavy. "Matthew's been trying to keep this from affecting Noah, but you've seen how he's been lately. He's carrying too much." Emma nodded, her mind racing. She knew that Matthew's protective nature wasn't limited to his son. It extended to everything he cared about, including his company. The stress of both worlds colliding was taking its toll, and if something didn't change soon, it could undo all the progress he'd made with Noah. "Do you think there's anything I can do to help?" Emma asked. Evelyn gave her a long, appraising look. "Keep doing what you're doing for Noah. That boy's happiness is the only thing keeping Matthew grounded right now." Emma returned to the living room, determined to shield Noah from the storm brewing in the office. She suggested they finish their treasure map adventure, and though Noah smiled, the spark from the previous day seemed dulled. As they played, Emma's thoughts strayed to Matthew. She had seen glimmers of the man he could be when he let his guard down, but she also saw the weight of the battles he fought alone. If he didn't allow someone in soon, she feared those battles would consume him entirely. Later that afternoon, Emma found an opportunity to speak with Matthew. She caught him in the kitchen, pouring a fresh cup of coffee, his face drawn with exhaustion. He looked up when she entered, his guarded expression flickering with something softer, perhaps gratitude, or simply relief at seeing someone who wasn't Daniel or Evelyn. "Rough day?" Emma asked, her tone light but empathetic. "You could say that," Matthew replied, running a hand through his hair. "It feels like everything's falling apart at once. The merger is hanging by a thread, and Daniel thinks someone on the inside might be feeding information to a competitor." "That sounds overwhelming," Emma said, choosing her words carefully. But you don't have to handle it alone. Matthew gave a short, humorless laugh. That's the thing I do. This company, this house, Noah, it's all on me. If I don't hold it together, everything falls apart. Emma stepped closer, her gaze steady. Matthew, I see how much you care. About Noah, about your work. But trying to do it all on your own, it's not sustainable. Even the strongest people need support. He looked at her, his expression conflicted. And who's going to provide that support? Evelyn's already doing more than enough, and Daniel, well, he's focused on salvaging the merger. What about me? Emma offered gently. I'm here, and I care. I care about Noah, and whether you want to admit it or not, I care about you too. The vulnerability in her words seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, he looked as though he might push her away, retreating behind the walls he'd carefully built. But then he exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. I appreciate what you're doing for Noah, Matthew said, his voice quieter now. More than I can say. But this, he gestured vaguely, as if to encompass his entire world. It's a lot to ask of anyone. Emma smiled faintly. You don't have to ask. Sometimes the people who care just show up, and they stay, even when it's hard. Matthew looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing her words. Finally he nodded, a small but significant gesture of acknowledgement. As Emma returned to Noah, she felt a spark of hope. Matthew's defenses weren't crumbling, but they were beginning to shift, allowing moments of connection to slip through. Yet, as the day wore on, the tension in the house remained palpable. The storm of the merger loomed large, and Emma sensed it wouldn't be long before it reached its breaking point. The tension in the Sinclair household reached a boiling point the next morning when Evelyn delivered a folder to Matthew in the middle of breakfast. Her normally composed expression was tense, and she avoided making eye contact with Emma or Noah as she placed the folder on the table beside Matthew. What is it? Matthew asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. Confirmation, Evelyn said simply. Daniel's suspicions were correct. There's been a data breach, and it was internal. Matthew opened the folder, his jaw tightening as he scanned the documents inside. His face darkened, and he muttered something under his breath before abruptly standing and leaving the table. Dad! Noah called after him, his voice filled with confusion. It's okay, Noah, Emma said quickly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Your dad just has something important to take care of. Noah nodded reluctantly, though his eyes lingered on the doorway through which Matthew had disappeared. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, then leaned toward Emma. You should talk to him, she said in a low voice. He's not going to handle this well on his own. Emma didn't need further convincing. She excused herself from the table, leaving Noah in Evelyn's care, and followed Matthew to his office. She found him pacing the room, his hands clenched into fists. This is a disaster, he said as she entered, not bothering to hide his frustration. If this gets out, the merger is dead, and everything I've built, everything I've worked for, is gone. Emma closed the door quietly behind her, taking a moment to compose herself before responding. It's not gone, Matthew. It's just a setback. And setbacks are part of life, even for someone like you. Matthew stopped pacing, his sharp gaze locking onto hers. You don't understand. This isn't just business. This is my family's legacy. If I fail... He trailed off, his voice cracking slightly. Emma stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. Matthew, you're not failing. You're dealing with a problem, and problems can be solved. But you can't do it if you let the pressure consume you. His shoulders sagged slightly, the weight of her words settling on him. What am I supposed to do then? Sit back and watch everything fall apart? No, Emma said, her tone softening. You face it, one step at a time, and you let the people around you help, even if it feels like you're giving up control. Matthew looked at her, his expression a mix of frustration and vulnerability. For a moment, the silence stretched between them, heavy, but not hostile. "I'll think about it," he said finally, his voice low. Emma nodded, recognizing the small victory for what it was. She left the office with a quiet sense of determination. Matthew wasn't ready to fully trust her or anyone, but cracks were beginning to form in his armor. Later that day, Matthew retreated deeper into his work, locking himself in his office as he and Daniel worked furiously to mitigate the fallout from the breach. The house once again felt heavy with unspoken tension, and Noah quickly picked up on it. Emma found him sitting by the fountain in the garden, his wooden sailboat floating in the still water. He prodded it gently with a stick, his expression distant. "What's on your mind, sailor?" Emma asked as she sat beside him. Noah shrugged, not looking up. "Dad's mad again. Is it my fault?" Emma's heart sank. She reached out, gently taking the stick from his hand. "No, Noah, it's not your fault. Your dad's dealing with something tough, but it has nothing to do with you. He loves you more than anything, even when he's upset." "But he's always busy," Noah said, his voice tinged with sadness. "And when he's not, he's tired. I just wish he didn't have to work so much." Emma nodded, her heart aching for the boy. "He works hard because he wants to protect you and give you a good life. But I think he's starting to realize that being here with you is just as important as his work." Noah tilted his head toward her, his eyes searching. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," Emma said with a smile, "and I think you're helping him see it too, just by being you." Noah's lips curved into a small smile, and Emma felt a flicker of hope. But her relief was short-lived when she turned to see Matthew standing in the doorway leading to the garden, his phone in hand. His face was tense, his brows furrowed, but his eyes softened when they met Emma's. "We need to talk," Matthew said, his voice low but firm. Emma nodded, rising to her feet. She glanced back at Noah, who was watching them curiously. "I'll be right back, okay?" Matthew led her to the side of the house, away from Noah's view. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I overheard what you said to him," he admitted. Emma held her breath, unsure of his reaction. "I hope I didn't overstep." "You didn't," Matthew said quickly, surprising her. "If anything, you said what I've been afraid to admit. I'm failing him, Emma. I'm trying to keep everything together, but I don't know how to balance it all." Emma's gaze softened, and she stepped closer. "You're not failing, Matthew. You're learning, and it's okay to ask for help along the way." Matthew let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "I don't know how to fix this merger or what to do about the breach, but I do know one thing. I can't keep letting it take me away from Noah." "That's a good start," Emma said with a gentle smile. "Maybe now you can take the next step. Focus on what matters most, and trust that the rest will fall into place." Matthew nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." As they returned to the house, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. Matthew was finally starting to shift his priorities, but the road ahead was still uncertain. She could only hope that his newfound resolve would hold, especially as the challenges he faced seemed far from over. The storm that had been brewing in Matthew's professional life broke wide open the next day. Emma was in the kitchen preparing snacks for Noah when Evelyn hurried in, her face pale and her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "It's all over the news," Evelyn said, her voice low but urgent. "The breach. Someone leaked it to the press." Emma's hands froze mid-motion. "What does that mean for the company? For Matthew?" Evelyn hesitated, her gaze darting toward the hallway. It means the merger is almost certainly dead, and if Matthew doesn't get ahead of this, it could damage the company's reputation permanently. Emma swallowed hard, her heart sinking at the weight of Evelyn's words. She could already imagine how Matthew would react to this latest blow. "Where is he now?" Emma asked. "Still in his office," Evelyn replied. "Daniel's with him, but it's bad, Emma. I don't know how much more he can take." Emma nodded, quickly finishing her task before heading to Noah's room. The boy was happily engrossed in a book, oblivious to the tension brewing elsewhere in the house. "Noah," Emma said gently, sitting beside him, "I'm going to check on your dad for a bit. Evelyn will be here if you need anything, okay?" "Is Dad okay?" Noah asked, looking up with wide eyes. Emma smiled softly. "He's just busy with work, but I'll make sure everything's fine." With that, she made her way to Matthew's office. She knocked lightly, but when no response came, she opened the door to find him seated at his desk, his face buried in his hands. Daniel stood nearby, his expression grim as he sifted through papers spread across the desk. "I'll give you two a moment," Daniel said, glancing at Emma before stepping out of the room. Matthew didn't look up as Emma approached. His shoulders slumped under the weight of the situation. "I heard about the leak," Emma said softly, standing across from him. "I'm so sorry, Matthew." "It's over," Matthew said bitterly, his voice muffled. "Everything I've worked for, gone." Emma's heart ached at the raw despair in his tone. She pulled up a chair, sitting close enough for him to feel her presence, but far enough to give him space. "It's not over," she said firmly. "This is a setback, yes, but you're not defeated, Matthew. You're stronger than that." He lifted his head slightly, his eyes filled with frustration. "You don't understand, Emma. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who depends on this company. My employees, their families, Noah." "Exactly," Emma said, her tone steady. "Noah doesn't need a perfect father or a flawless company. He needs you. The man who stays up at night worrying about him, the man who made a sailboat with his father and shared that memory with his son. That's the man who can get through this." Matthew stared at her for a long moment, her words sinking in. He looked away, his gaze falling to the photo of Emily on his desk. "She always believed I could handle anything," he murmured. "She wasn't wrong," Emma said gently. "You can handle this, Matthew. But you don't have to do it alone." Matthew let out a long breath, leaning back in his chair as if the weight of the conversation had given him pause. Emma stayed quiet, giving him the space he needed. His eyes lingered on the photo of Emily for a moment longer before he finally spoke. "You really think I can fix this?" he asked, his voice laced with doubt. "I don't think you need to fix everything right away," Emma replied. "I think you need to focus on what you can do today, one step at a time. Start with the people you trust. Let them help you." Matthew nodded slowly, his hands resting on the edge of the desk. "Daniel's already working on damage control. He's reaching out to the board and key investors, but the press, they're relentless. This kind of scandal doesn't just fade." "Then you focus on the part you can control," Emma said. "Be honest with the people who matter most. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that people respect someone who faces problems head-on, not someone who hides from them." Matthew's expression softened, her words cutting through the noise of his own doubts. "Emily used to say something like that," he said quietly. "She believed in facing things, even when it was terrifying." "Then honor that belief," Emma said, her voice firm but kind. "Not just for her, but for yourself, for Noah." The mention of his son seemed to ground Matthew. He straightened slightly, his gaze sharpening. "Noah, I don't want him to know about this. Not yet." Emma nodded. "Of course. But he's already picked up on your stress, Matthew. He's a smart kid. The best thing you can do is spend time with him, even if it's just a little bit every day. Let him see that you're still here for him." Matthew seemed to absorb her words, a flicker of determination returning to his eyes. "I'll try," he said finally, his voice steadier now. "That's all anyone can ask," Emma said with a small smile. As Matthew stood, his posture was still tense, but there was a renewed focus in his movements. "I need to call Daniel back and finalize some statements," he said, his tone more purposeful. "Thank you, Emma, for everything." "Anytime," she replied, stepping aside as he headed toward the door. When he left, Emma lingered for a moment, her eyes falling to the photo of Emily on the desk. She wondered what the woman would think of Matthew now, of the father he was striving to become, even under the crushing weight of his circumstances. That evening, Matthew made good on his promise. He joined Noah for dinner, setting aside his phone and giving his son his full attention for the first time in days. Emma watched from the kitchen as they laughed over silly jokes and talked about plans for their next treasure hunt. The tension in the house wasn't gone, but the connection between father and son was growing stronger, a thread of hope pulling them closer. As Emma cleaned up, Evelyn appeared beside her, her usual sharp demeanor softened. "Whatever you said to him, it's working," she said quietly. Emma smiled faintly. "I didn't do anything special. I just reminded him what's important." "Well, keep doing it," Evelyn said with a small nod. "This house needs it." As Emma turned off the lights and headed to her room that night, she felt a cautious optimism. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, it felt like Matthew was truly facing his challenges, and not just for himself, but for the people he cared about most. The Sinclair mansion hummed with a cautious energy the next morning. Though the tensions of the past days still lingered, there was a noticeable shift. Matthew appeared more focused, his movements deliberate as he prepared for a critical day. Emma noticed it first during breakfast. Matthew joined Noah and her at the table, a rarity during a weekday morning. He poured himself a cup of coffee, took a seat, and smiled faintly at his son. "Big day today, champ," he said. "But before I head out, I want to hear about your treasure map plans." Noah's face lit up, his earlier wariness melting away. "We're almost ready to go, Dad. Emma and I added another island yesterday. It's where the sea monsters live." "Sea monsters, huh?" Matthew said, raising an eyebrow. "Sounds like a dangerous journey. You think we can handle it?" "With you, we definitely can," Noah exclaimed, his voice brimming with confidence. Emma watched the exchange with a quiet smile. This was the Matthew she had hoped to see, a father present and engaged, even in the midst of his challenges. As breakfast wrapped up, Evelyn entered the room, her usual professional demeanor intact, but her expression tinged with concern. "Matthew, Daniel's on the line. He's ready to finalize the statement." Matthew stood, placing a reassuring hand on Noah's shoulder. "I'll be back before lunch, buddy. Save some treasure hunting for me, all right?" Noah nodded enthusiastically as Matthew followed Evelyn out of the room. In the study, Daniel's voice crackled over the speakerphone as Matthew reviewed the prepared statement. The goal was clear: acknowledge the breach, take accountability, and reassure stakeholders that the company was taking decisive action. "It's direct, transparent, and leaves no room for speculation," Daniel said. "It's the best move we can make right now." Matthew frowned, his finger tapping lightly on the desk. "And the board is on board with this?" "They're aligned," Daniel confirmed. "But they're looking to you to lead the narrative. If this doesn't come from you, it'll lose impact." Matthew leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the window. The mansion's sprawling garden came into view, the fountain glistening under the soft morning light. For a brief moment, he thought of Noah and the treasure map, a reminder of what truly mattered beyond the chaos of the merger. "All right," Matthew said finally. "Let's do it. Schedule the press briefing for this afternoon." Daniel's tone lightened with approval. "I'll take care of the logistics. You've got this, Matthew." As the call ended, Matthew sat in silence, the weight of the upcoming briefing settling over him. It wasn't just about salvaging the merger, it was about proving to himself and everyone else that he could weather this storm. Emma knocked softly on the door before entering. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her tone gentle but direct. "I've been better," Matthew admitted, his voice quieter than usual. "The press briefing is scheduled for this afternoon. I have to face the fallout head-on." "That's a big step," Emma said, sitting across from him, "and it's the right one." Matthew's gaze met hers, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "What if it's not enough? What if I still lose everything?" "You won't," Emma said firmly, "because you're not just fighting for the company. You're fighting for Noah, for your family's future. That's what makes you strong, Matthew." Her words seemed to resonate, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He gave her a small nod, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you," he said quietly. As Emma left the room, she felt a swell of hope. Matthew was stepping into a challenge that could define not just his career, but the man he was striving to become. The hours leading up to the press briefing passed in a blur. Matthew spent most of the morning reviewing key points with Daniel, while Evelyn coordinated the logistics. Though his demeanor remained calm on the surface, Emma could see the tension brewing just beneath. By the time the briefing was set to begin, the Sinclair mansion had quieted. Matthew emerged from his office in a tailored suit, his expression composed, but his eyes betraying the weight of what was to come. "You've got this, Matthew," Emma said as he passed her near the living room. Her voice was steady, a grounding presence amidst the storm. He paused, offering her a faint smile. "Thanks, Emma. That means more than you know." Evelyn ushered him to the car waiting outside, and just like that, he was gone. The mansion felt emptier in his absence, though Noah remained blissfully unaware of the day's stakes. "Can we finish the map now?" Noah asked as he tugged at Emma's sleeve. "Of course," she replied with a smile, determined to keep the boy's day as normal as possible. Meanwhile, at the press briefing, Matthew stood before a sea of cameras and reporters. The bright lights felt oppressive, and the weight of countless eyes on him was almost suffocating. But as Daniel introduced him, Matthew took a deep breath, recalling Emma's words earlier that morning. He stepped forward, his hands steady as he gripped the podium. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice clear and even. "I'm here today to address the recent breach of sensitive company data, a breach that has understandably caused concern among our stakeholders, employees, and customers." Matthew spoke with a deliberate cadence, acknowledging the mistakes while emphasizing the steps being taken to address them. He owned the narrative, outlining how the company would recover and prevent similar incidents in the future. "Accountability begins with me," he said, his gaze steady as he looked out over the room. "And I assure you, we are committed to rebuilding trust and ensuring the security of our operations moving forward." The room was silent as he finished, the reporters scribbling furiously in their notepads. Daniel gave him a subtle nod from the sidelines, a signal that the statement had landed well. Back at the mansion, Emma and Noah completed their treasure map, the boy's excitement infectious as he added finishing touches. "Dad's going to love this," Noah said proudly, holding up the map for Emma to see. "I'm sure he will," Emma said, her smile genuine, "and I think he'll need an adventure after today." As the afternoon wore on, Emma kept an eye on the clock, waiting for news from the briefing. When Matthew finally returned, she met him in the entryway, her heart lifting at the sight of him. "Well?" she asked, her tone cautious but hopeful. "It went Better than I expected, Matthew admitted, his voice tinged with relief. The response was measured, and Daniel thinks we've stabilized things for now. That's great news, Emma said, a smile breaking across her face. It's a start, Matthew said, his gaze softening as he looked toward the living room where Noah's laughter echoed. And it reminded me of what's really important. Emma followed his gaze, her own heart swelling with quiet pride. You did good, Matthew. I hope you see that. For the first time in days, Matthew seemed to truly relax. He stepped into the living room, where Noah greeted him with an excited grin and the finished treasure map. Dad! Look! Noah exclaimed, holding up the map. We're ready for the big adventure. Matthew crouched beside his son, taking the map in his hands. It looks amazing, champ. I can't wait to get started. Emma watched as father and son laughed together, the weight of the day fading into the background. Progress had been made, not just in Matthew's professional life, but in his role as a father. As the day turned to evening, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. The Sinclair family still had challenges ahead, but they were facing them together, a team growing stronger with each step forward. The weekend arrived with a crisp, clear sky, a rare gift in Seattle. Matthew had promised Noah they would spend the day on their treasure map adventure, and the boys' excitement had been building all morning. Emma found Noah in the garden, carefully packing a small bag with supplies, a notebook, colored pencils, and a plastic water bottle. The treasure map was folded neatly in his hand, its edges already worn from frequent use. Do you think we'll find real treasure? Noah asked, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. I think you'll find something even better, Emma replied with a smile, straightening the straps of his bag. What's better than treasure? Noah asked, tilting his head curiously. You'll see, Emma said mysteriously, her tone playful. Matthew appeared moments later, dressed casually in jeans and a jacket, a far cry from the composed businessman he had been during the week. He carried a small thermos and a blanket under one arm, looking relaxed and ready for the adventure ahead. Are you two ready for this mission? He asked, his voice light but warm. Ready! Noah shouted, bouncing on his toes. Emma handed Matthew a small backpack with snacks and supplies. Don't forget to take breaks, she said, her voice carrying a hint of her usual caregiving tone. Yes, ma'am, Matthew replied with a teasing smile, earning a laugh from Noah. As they set off toward the garden and the wooded trail beyond it, Emma watched them go with a sense of quiet satisfaction. This was a moment for them, father and son, and she was content to give them the space to bond. The trail wound through the trees, sunlight filtering through the canopy above. Noah led the way, clutching the treasure map like a seasoned explorer. Matthew followed closely, his eyes scanning the path ahead, but frequently drifting to his son's animated movements. Okay, the map says we need to cross the river next, Noah announced, pointing toward a small stream up ahead. Matthew chuckled. That's more of a creek than a river, champ. It's a river if we say it is, Noah insisted, grinning. Matthew couldn't help but laugh. Fair enough. Let's cross the great river then. They found a series of stepping stones and carefully made their way across, Noah clutching Matthew's hand tightly for balance. On the other side, they paused for a snack break, spreading the blanket on a sunny patch of grass. As they ate, Noah chattered excitedly about the map, pointing out their progress and predicting what they might find at the X. Matthew listened intently, his usual guarded expression replaced by genuine engagement. Dad, Noah said suddenly, his tone more serious. Do you think Mum would like this map? Matthew froze for a moment, caught off guard by the question. I think she would love it, he said softly. She always loved adventures. Like us, Noah said, his voice quiet but certain. Like us, Matthew agreed, his gaze lingering on his son. For a moment the two of them sat in comfortable silence, the bond between them palpable. Matthew felt something shift inside him, a sense of peace he hadn't known he needed. When they packed up and resumed their journey, the tension of the past week felt like a distant memory. Each step they took brought them closer to the X on the map, and unknowingly, closer to each other. As the trail began to narrow, Noah checked the treasure map again, his small finger tracing their route. "We're almost there," he exclaimed, his voice bubbling with excitement. Matthew smiled, watching his son's enthusiasm. "What do you think we'll find at the X?" Noah grinned mischievously. "Maybe gold, or jewels, or a secret pirate cave." "Well, we'll just have to see," Matthew said, stepping over a cluster of roots and helping Noah do the same. After another few minutes of walking, they arrived at a clearing. In the center stood a large tree with sprawling branches that cast dappled shadows on the ground. Noah ran ahead, clutching the map, and knelt at the base of the tree. "This is it," he declared, pointing to the ground. "The X is here!" Matthew joined him, crouching beside the tree. "All right, let's see what we've got." Noah dug into the soft dirt with his hands, giggling as the soil crumbled beneath his fingers. Matthew grabbed a stick to help, and together they unearthed a small, weathered box that had been buried beneath the roots. "Whoa!" Noah exclaimed, his eyes wide with wonder. "Did you hide this, Dad?" Matthew shook his head, just as surprised as Noah. "I didn't. Let's open it and find out what's inside." Noah eagerly pried the lid open, revealing a collection of trinkets, a handful of polished stones, a small journal, and a tiny figurine of a whale carved from wood. "It's like a time capsule," Matthew said, picking up the journal. The pages were filled with sketches and notes, clearly made by a child. Whoever left this must have loved this spot. Noah held up the whale figurine, his face lighting up. "It's a whale, just like the ones Emma talks about." Matthew smiled, his heart warming at the joy on Noah's face. "Looks like we found a real treasure after all." As they examined the rest of the box's contents, Matthew felt a deep sense of connection, not just to the moment, but to his son. For so long he had been consumed by his work, by his grief, by his fears of failing as a father. But here, in this quiet clearing, those worries seemed to fade. "Dad?" Noah asked, breaking the silence. "Yeah, champ?" Matthew replied, looking down at him. "Can we come back here again?" "Of course," Matthew said, his voice soft but resolute. "This can be our special place." Noah beamed, hugging the whale figurine tightly to his chest. On the walk back, the air was filled with Noah's excited chatter about their treasure and plans for future adventures. Matthew listened, his heart lighter than it had been in years. When they returned to the mansion, Emma was waiting for them in the garden, her smile growing as she saw the joy radiating from both father and son. "Did you find the treasure?" she asked playfully. "We did!" Noah exclaimed, holding up the whale figurine. "And it's the best treasure ever!" Emma laughed, crouching to examine the tiny carving. "It's perfect," she said, glancing up at Matthew. "Looks like the adventure was a success." "It was," Matthew said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for pushing me to do this." Emma's smile softened. "You didn't need much pushing. You're a great dad, Matthew. You just needed to believe it." Matthew nodded, his gaze steady. "I'm starting to." As Noah ran ahead to show Evelyn their discovery, Matthew and Emma lingered for a moment, sharing a quiet understanding. "Thank you," Matthew said again, his voice low but sincere, "for everything." "You don't have to thank me," Emma replied. "Just keep showing up for him. That's all that matters." Matthew smiled, a sense of peace settling over him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path, one step at a time, with the people who mattered most by his side. The days following their treasure hunt marked a noticeable shift in the Sinclair household. The heaviness that had once permeated the mansion seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of warmth and tentative hope. Matthew was visibly more present, making an effort to spend time with Noah, even as he continued to tackle the challenges of his business. One crisp morning, Emma found Matthew and Noah in the living room, huddled over a jigsaw puzzle that sprawled across the coffee table. Matthew was dressed casually, his sleeves rolled up as he helped Noah piece together the edges of a vibrant underwater scene. "Good morning," Emma said as she entered, her smile widening at the sight. "Morning," Noah chirped, waving a piece of the puzzle in the air. "Dad's actually really good at this." Matthew chuckled softly, glancing up at Emma. "I've had a lot of practice with strategy. This isn't too different." "It's teamwork," Noah said proudly, fitting a piece into place. "We're almost done." Emma moved closer, admiring their progress. "It looks like you two make a great team." Noah beamed at the praise, but Matthew's smile held a hint of something deeper. Gratitude, perhaps, or recognition of how far they had come. As the puzzle neared completion, Noah yawned, his energy from the morning starting to wane. Emma noticed immediately and crouched beside him. "Feeling tired, sailor?" she asked gently. "A little," Noah admitted, rubbing his eyes. "Why don't we take a break?" Emma suggested. "You can finish the puzzle later with your dad." Noah nodded, leaning against Matthew, who wrapped an arm around his son protectively. "Let's get you comfortable," Matthew said, lifting Noah effortlessly and carrying him toward his room. Emma followed, her heart swelling at the tenderness in Matthew's gestures. He tucked Noah into bed, ensuring his inhaler was within reach before brushing the boy's hair back gently. "I'll be right here if you need me," Matthew said softly. Noah nodded, his eyes already drooping. "Thanks, Dad." Matthew lingered for a moment, watching his son before stepping back and joining Emma at the doorway. They walked quietly to the kitchen, where Matthew poured himself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. "You're really good with him," Emma said, breaking the silence. "I'm learning," Matthew replied, his tone humble. "He deserves that much, at least." Emma nodded, her gaze steady. "You're doing more than just learning, Matthew. You're showing up for him, and that's what matters." Matthew met her eyes, the intensity of his gaze catching her off guard. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said quietly. "You've been more than I ever expected." Emma's breath caught, the sincerity in his words stirring something deep within her. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "Sorry to interrupt," Evelyn said, her tone careful. "Matthew, Daniel just called. He says there's been a development with the merger." Matthew straightened, his composure returning in an instant. "I'll take the call in my office," he said, nodding to Evelyn. As he left, Emma found herself rooted to the spot, her emotions swirling. Matthew's words had been genuine and the connection between them undeniable, but his world was still so full of uncertainty. She couldn't help but wonder where, or if, she fit into it. Emma spent the rest of the morning tending to small tasks around the mansion, her mind preoccupied with the lingering intensity of her conversation with Matthew. His words replayed in her head. "You've been more than I ever expected." As she folded Noah's laundry, her thoughts shifted to him. Noah was thriving in ways he hadn't when she first arrived, his laughter filling the halls and his curiosity reigniting. Matthew had changed too, becoming more present, more connected. But what about her? She realized with some trepidation that her place in their lives had grown beyond the role of caregiver. By mid-afternoon, she found herself in the garden, watering the flower beds. The rhythmic sound of water against soil was soothing. a welcome distraction from the questions swirling in her mind. "Emma?" She turned to see Matthew standing a few feet away, his tie loosened and his expression thoughtful. The sunlight softened his features, making him look less like the imposing businessman she had met weeks ago and more like the father she had come to know. "Everything okay?" she asked, setting the watering can aside. "The call with Daniel went well," Matthew said, stepping closer. "We've stabilized things with the board, and the merger is back on track. It's not perfect, but it's progress." "That's great news," Emma said sincerely, a smile breaking across her face. Matthew hesitated, his hands slipping into his pockets. "There's something else I need to say." Emma's heartbeat quickened. "What is it?" Matthew took a deep breath, his gaze steady. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about showing up for the people who matter." Emma nodded, unsure where he was going, but feeling the weight of his words. "You've done more than just help Noah," he continued, his voice softer now. "You've helped me see things I didn't want to face. You've reminded me what it means to be a father, to be part of a family. And you've reminded me what it feels like to hope again." Emma's chest tightened, her breath catching. "Matthew, Before she could respond, Noah's voice carried from the house. "Dad! Emma! Come look at this!" The moment broke, and Matthew smiled faintly. "Let's see what he's up to," he said, gesturing toward the house. Emma nodded, her emotions still swirling as they walked inside. In the living room, they found Noah proudly displaying the completed treasure map, now framed in a makeshift border of construction paper and glitter. "Look!" he exclaimed, holding it up. "It's finished. And Evelyn helped me frame it, so it'll stay perfect forever." "That's amazing, buddy," Matthew said, crouching to admire the artwork. "You did a fantastic job." Emma smiled, her heart full as she watched the pride on Noah's face. "We should hang it somewhere special," Noah suggested, glancing between Emma and Matthew. "Maybe in the hallway so we can see it every day." "I think that's a great idea," Matthew agreed, "but I have an even better one. Let's celebrate with a family dinner tonight. What do you think?" Noah cheered, and Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest at the word family. As the evening unfolded, laughter and light filled the Sinclair household. Around the dining table, for the first time in years, the house felt whole, a place of joy and connection. But as Emma looked across the table at Matthew, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to be said, more to be felt. And she knew deep down that the moments they had shared that day were only the beginning of something much larger. The day of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, the Sinclair mansion buzzing with quiet excitement. The garden had been transformed into a picturesque venue, with white chairs arranged in neat rows facing an archway adorned with flowers. The scent of roses and fresh-cut grass filled the air, mingling with the sound of soft instrumental music playing in the background. Emma stood in her room, smoothing the fabric of her simple yet elegant dress. She couldn't help but smile as she thought about the journey that had brought her here, to this family, to this moment. The past weeks had been filled with challenges and revelations, but today wasn't about the struggles. It was about celebrating the future. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Evelyn entered, her usual sharp demeanor softened by the warmth in her expression. "You look lovely," Evelyn said, a rare note of affection in her voice. "Thank you," Emma replied, her cheeks flushing. "Everything looks amazing out there." Evelyn nodded, stepping closer. "Matthew wanted today to be perfect, for Noah and for you." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "He's done so much already. This is more than enough." Evelyn smirked faintly. "You underestimate him. When Matthew Sinclair sets his mind to something, he sees it through." Before Emma could respond, Noah's voice echoed from the hallway. "Emma, Come see this." She exchanged a quick glance with Evelyn before heading out to find Noah. He was dressed in a little suit, complete with a bow tie, his excitement radiating as he gestured toward the garden. "Look at all the flowers," he exclaimed, "and the arch. It's just like the ones in stories." Emma crouched beside him, adjusting his bow tie with a smile. "You look very handsome, Noah. I think you're going to steal the show today." Noah giggled, his enthusiasm infectious. "Are you nervous?" he asked suddenly, his wide eyes searching hers. Emma paused, considering the question. "A little," she admitted. "But it's a good kind of nervous. Sometimes big moments feel that way." "Dad says today's a big moment for all of us," Noah said, his voice thoughtful. Emma's chest tightened with emotion. "He's right," she said softly. "It is." As the ceremony began, the garden filled with guests, their murmurs quieting as Matthew stepped forward to greet them. He was dressed in a classic black suit, his usual stoic demeanor softened by a smile that seemed almost unrecognizable from the man Emma had met weeks ago. Noah stood proudly at his father's side, holding the small ring box with steady hands. As Matthew spoke to the gathered friends and family, his voice was strong but filled with emotion. "Today isn't just about a new beginning," Matthew said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd before landing on Emma. "It's about recognizing the people who remind us of what truly matters: family, love, and the courage to hope again." Emma felt her throat tighten, her eyes misting as she listened. Matthew's words weren't just for the guests. They were for her, for Noah, and for the family they were building together. As the ceremony moved forward, Emma's heart swelled with gratitude and love. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a declaration of everything they had overcome and everything they hoped to build in the future. As the ceremony transitioned to its final moments, Emma stepped forward to join Matthew under the flower-adorned arch. The late afternoon sunlight bathed the garden in a golden glow, casting a warmth over the gathered guests. Noah beamed as he handed Matthew the ring, his pride unmistakable. "Here you go, Dad," he whispered, his excitement spilling over. "Thanks, champ," Matthew replied, his voice gentle as he ruffled Noah's hair before turning back to Emma. Emma's breath caught as Matthew took her hand. The weight of the moment settled over her, a culmination of everything they had faced together, the struggles that had brought them here, and the quiet victories that had made this day possible. Matthew's voice was steady but laced with emotion as he spoke. "Emma, when you came into our lives, I thought you were here to help Noah. And you did. You gave him light and joy when I didn't know how. But what I didn't expect was how much you would help me. You taught me to hope again, to trust again, and to believe that even after loss, there can be love." Emma felt tears well in her eyes, her voice trembling slightly as she responded. "Matthew, you and Noah showed me what it means to be part of a family. You've both given me more than I ever thought I deserved: trust, love, and a home. I'm so grateful for this journey, and I can't wait to see where it takes us." The officiant smiled warmly as they exchanged rings, her words sealing the commitment they had made to one another. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." As Matthew leaned in, the guests erupted into applause, their cheers mingling with Noah's exuberant whoop of delight. The kiss was tender, filled with the promise of the future they would build together. As the evening unfolded, the garden transformed into a lively reception. Laughter and music filled the air, the guests mingling under twinkling lights strung between the trees. Noah darted from table to table, showing off the framed treasure map to anyone who would listen, his joy infectious. Emma found herself standing at the edge of the garden, taking in the scene with a sense of awe. She had never imagined a day like this, filled with so much love, so much hope. Matthew approached her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He handed her one with a soft smile. "You've been quiet," he said. "Just taking it all in," Emma replied, her voice warm. Matthew looked out over the celebration, his gaze lingering on Noah, who was spinning in circles on the dance floor. "It's a good day," he said softly. Emma nodded, her heart full. "It's a perfect day." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Matthew turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "I meant what I said earlier, Emma. You've changed everything for us, for me." "And you've changed everything for me," Emma said, her voice steady despite the emotions swelling within her. "This isn't just your family anymore, Matthew. It's ours." Matthew's smile deepened, his hand finding hers. Together, they walked back to the center of the garden, where Noah ran to join them, his face flushed with happiness. "Dance with us, Mom," Noah said, grabbing Emma's hand. The word Mom sent a surge of warmth through her chest, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "I'd love to," she said, letting Noah pull her toward the dance floor. As the three of them swayed to the music, surrounded by the laughter and joy of friends and family, Emma felt a sense of belonging unlike anything she had ever known. The Sinclair family wasn't perfect, but it was whole, and that was more than enough.